We have now on stage with us Tom Vaillant from Minuten, Nicolas Staub from NZZ, and our sales director that Klokan mentioned earlier, Luis Suter. So thank you very much for joining us. So we're just going to talk about some of the complex sort of issues and challenges around delivering maps in visual storytelling and in the media. So I think we'll start off with actually, Tom, if you could tell us about the challenges that you have with facing the engaging with the audience.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I think thinking about this question was more about the fact that the audience is fragmented and based on where we're publishing a visual, it's a different audience with different intentions and with a different ability to sort of focus in time. And so if we're on Instagram, people are just scrolling very quickly. And then we need a static map that is going to catch attention and communicate something really simply. If somebody's maybe in the app, they have a bit more time if they're not too in a rush. And the intention is to consume something more complex and to scroll through or to explore. And then we have video. And every time it's a different age group as well. So I think that's a challenge because it's not as simple as just copy-pasting a map and using it across platforms. Sometimes we spend a lot of time redesigning maps, even for print. So I think that's where having the ability to use one mapping service across different platforms can be really helpful. And I sort of landed into these different platforms, a bit echoing your mention of like everywhere Peter's name pops up. It was sort of me talking to Luis, and MapTiler would pop up. It's like, oh, I need to do static maps. We have a plugin for QGIS. Oh, amazing. I need to do video. We have a plugin for that too. Oh, amazing. So yeah.
Great. And Nicola, similar challenges at NZZ. What have you found to be the main things that you're finding difficult to get right first time?
I mean, yeah, to be fair, it sounds pretty similar. What Tom is describing. I think in our case, what's a bit different is that I'm part of a team of developers, and we're in turn a part of a department called Visuals, and we're around 30 people, so we have a lot of men and woman power for doing like visual journalism. And in our case, we're really trying to, at least in our team, we're trying to build like tools for our journalists and designers, so they don't have to worry about all these kind of questions. We're just giving them the answers. And MapTiler is, of course, like a key to that answer because it just allows us to make complex or interactive maps way more easily. And so yeah, but it's always like a huge point of discussion. Like we're of course building mobile first. But there's always like we have the newspaper as well, like the print media with it as well, which is a huge part still a huge part of our audience. But that's something for our designers to break their heads about. Like, okay, how are we going to get this like cool interactive mobile map now into print? Like, what do we have to take out so it gives kind of a similar experience, but of course you don't have the interaction.
Yeah. And so I was just gonna add there that I think for me, when I'm interacting with media customers, it's really interesting to think about how the different mediums that media organizations use and maps almost kind of evolved a little bit in parallel, right? From starting on print and drawing and typing and really being a print first thing, now kind of maybe into the future going into wearables and glasses and different stuff, and then everything in between, right? And being able to cover that full range of different mediums from print to static to video with evening news and everything else is something I think that can be quite unique and kind of reflects that those two industries are somewhat connected and evolve maybe not in parallel, but in a way that's a little bit synergetic.
I think you've both touched on it a little bit there, but when it comes to selecting these tools or technologies, this space has quite a lot of options. Nicola, what would you say were the sort of the key deciding features or benefits of the tools?
I I mean, on the technical side, we're using Svelte, like this JavaScript kind of compiler for building all these like interactives, which also, there's also like the MapTiler SDK, of course, like the JavaScript library, which is easily usable in that sort of context. And I think we're pretty happy with the tools you already have, like for building these kind of smaller web applications and like the tooling for them for the mapping part. And so I think the biggest question in our case is more like using the right tool for the right case or for the right story, because you can do a lot of stuff in JavaScript, you can do a lot of stuff in Illustrator, you can do a lot of stuff in After Effects, but is it always like the right tool for the right case?
And you'll need consistency, like we were saying there, between those different tools so that...
Of course, yeah.
You'll same maps, but in different scenarios. How about you, Tom? Similar ideas, or have you had a...
Similar. I think flexibility is always key. If I'm locked in and I can't export a certain format, because like we just said, that the platforms and now the wearables, everything is changing really quickly. So the flexibility to move data around, to apply maps in different platforms, that's key. And if I'm locked in just because of some platform principle, it's a huge point of friction. But I think the point that sort of pushed me quite far into a MapTiler daily user is, and this is where I give a shout out to the support team, because on a story when we were prototyping an interactive scrolly for NZZ, we had to push a lot of new features, and Radek and Jiri were always very responsive, very willing to work with me to sort of put in new features. And still today, when we have new questions and new ideas, there's always a conversation. It's not just a no, we don't have time for this. It's let's see when we can make it happen. And I think that's great. That's really something wonderful to work with.
I would actually like to build on that. We had a pretty similar experience with MapTiler. I just was talking to Peter before about a funny story which happened 5 years ago when the Ukrainian war started. We, of course, made a map because we thought we wanted to visualize that to our readers, like what is happening in that conflict. And at the time, we were still using for like some maps we already were using MapTiler, and for the maps we just still used Mapbox. And for the interactive map, we thought, yeah, Mapbox works. And then we got like the first big bill, because a lot of users interact with the map, of course, which is nice, but of course, Mapbox isn't that cheap. And then we were like, yeah, we can't do that anymore. It's just we can't afford that. And then, of course, MapTiler was the better deal in that sense. And since then, we just made a lot of really good experiences, especially with the map editor, which also changed over the years. And it just like, it always came at the right time. Always, we were thinking about, yeah, we need kind of that feature. We're still missing something. Then something changed. A new version came out, and also like the support teams are really amazing.
But that's where I also have to kind of give the thanks back also to you and the customers, because that's really how we operate and how we try to evolve, right? We need those insights from the users and try to flexibly develop into that direction. So when it comes to interaction, adding session-based billing instead of request-based billing, your feedback on all of the camera animations for the scrolly map, right, where you go down and can kind of fly along and follow the story was something that enabled us to move forward. So that interaction with the customers really is key and drives us forward, right? We want to develop things for people to use, not just because we think it's cool. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So, and getting the themes there, flexibility, obviously, naturally, pricing, and this back and forth, this
human touch.
Human touch, the support angle. So, going to something a little bit more conceptual now, but I mean, slightly preaching to the converted, maps are great. We all appreciate them and love them, but you guys are at the forefront of connecting with the wider public, maybe not so spatially literate or map obsessed as we are. So do you think that the geospatial context, the mapping side of things, can foster that empathy or deeper connection between the audience and the subject matter? Tom?
We were wondering about this because there's always, in Switzerland, there's also multiple languages. And we have that a lot, especially if you're reaching to broader countries, if you're publishing video. And so anything that's visual and graphic, it's a universal language. And that helps with issues when it comes to translation and understanding. So I think I would go back to empathy maybe later when we discuss AR and spatial, because that's a space where really I think maps are in their best elements. You're living them. And I think that's where we can really start on the topic of empathy. But at least when it comes to understanding, I think maps are key, and it's always a battle of how much people want to put into maps. I don't know if you have this too, where it's always like, no, we need to add these 5 cities and this and that, and we're always looking at, okay, they're going to be on a very small screen with a little bit of time, and we need to focus this map. So I think it's great for understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a very important thing, that it's a sort of almost like a non-verbal language, so it crosses cultures. Nicola, how about your experience of these sorts of things? Are you finding it more common that people are requesting spatial elements to their stories, or?
Actually, we wish that people would do that more often, because we find it often the case that there is just a huge text, I don't know, 10,000 or more characters, and there's no map whatsoever, but it's talking all the time about certain places or certain countries, and you feel like, okay, the story is really good, but I don't know where this place is. I don't have any connection to it. And so, of course, we have a lot of tools, like we're trying to enable our journalists to do that by themselves, because we give them the right tools so they can easily create a map if they want to. But it's just like this kind of mindset from, okay, I'm just a journalist, I just write my text, to, okay, how can I make the story more engaging? How can I make it more create a better connection to the reader, like by adding visuals or maps in that case?
Well, maybe also maintaining editorial control, right? Because when you were saying this, I was having to think back also to some of my reading from studies and stuff like that, in a quite famous book on maps, like how to lie with maps, right? And maps are just about, or rather, let's put it this way, people see a map and they kind of read it as a ground truth. It's on the map, it must be true, right? But with a map, there's always decisions of what you choose to show, and then as much what you choose not to show, or how you choose to represent it. So that editorial control for making sure that the maps represent company policy or editorial guidelines or anything like that, I think is quite important to have, and fosters then that kind of trust. I don't know about empathy, but at least trust, right? And maybe you need the trust before you can develop the empathy.
And I'd love to add on to that, because I spoke to an audience editor at the Guardian who mentioned that when they polled their readers, they found that people trusted data-driven stories much more. And in an era where, for a lot of good reasons, we're losing trust and connection to readers, when you're talking about things that are left out, it's the same with data in general, and that problem, I think, is amplified when it's text. Because then you need to be drastic with what you leave out. It just takes too much room. So with a map, it's still the same issue, but you have the ability to put in more information, or at least if you have interaction and it's on web, you can put multiple layers. So that maybe you have a first glance that's really simple, and for someone who is really interested in diving in, you have the ability to have more data, more layers, and therefore I think more trust and more transparency.
Cool point.
Brilliant, thank you. And how are you getting on, Nicola, with being able to sort of measure the impact that these map-centric stories are having? Is there anything that you're doing there to see what's happening?
That is still an open issue in our case. I mean, of course, you have like a whole data team and audience team which tracks like any article, like just user interactions, views, read time, etc. But in our case, like tracking what the impact is of certain visuals or interactives, it's really hard, because we didn't figure out anything for now. Still working on this, like how is the story better when we added this map there? Did it change like in case of engagement, did the user spend more time on the article because of the map, or wouldn't it have make any change at all? So like, of course, you can just slap on certain metrics, but yeah, we still didn't figure out like a strategy to how we measure the success of our visual stories. I don't know how it's in your case, Tom.
Similar point, sorry, Tom, but
no,
essentially, I think it's difficult to measure across so many different platforms. So
Yeah.
on print, there's no tracking. On social media, there's 7 different platforms, so it's difficult to see if this post worked better because it has a map, either as a title image or in the carousel. And then on web, we have a bit more ability to see how things work. But I think maps, so in general, we see that stories with graphics get shared more.
Yeah.
In general, and that can be charts or maps. But I think maps specifically have become so critical when we have an Abstimmung, when we have anything that's Swiss related, the Swiss map that's used as a heat map to represent data is just omnipresent, it's critical. So it's almost unimaginable to have that article without a map. And I think because of that, maybe it's also less tracking because we know those articles are going to be a hit piece. They're of massive interest.
I think we see it a little bit as well. I mean, if you look historically, that some of the massive spikes that we've had on our infrastructure that have gone well as well, I'm very happy to say, have been for things like the Ukraine map, right, where a lot of people are going and checking it, or COVID dashboards, right, back in the day. So we definitely see on our side that those kinds of media-based visual storytelling or scrolly map interactions cause massive spikes. But then on the media side, measuring the impact of that on your metrics is probably another level on top.
Fantastic. So we've talked a little bit about our collaborations and the feedback and progress we've made. But looking to the future, what would you like to see mapping providers like ourselves give for you in sort of like the near future? I heard you mentioned AR as something, but how can we provide you with better tools for visual storytelling?
I mean, I'm still processing the announcement from earlier, and I'm going to have a bunch of questions. But I just got back from San Francisco, where the goal, among some other AI things, was to test augmented reality. Because I think it's good to plan for the next sort of platform and an interface that our readers will be using to sometimes consume information, and that is likely to be smart glasses. I can't make a bet on, say, 100% it will be mainstream, but it looks really promising. And so in that space, when people can interact with things spatially, I am so excited. I'm so excited for 3D, and I'm particularly excited for maps. And this is, again, one of those scenarios where it sort of goes to what Peter was saying about this willingness to work with other providers, where I sort of land back into MapTiler after trying to find a solution to something. And it was the same with geolayers and video animation. In this case, I'm trying to build an AR map, and Luis is like, have you seen our AR maps? And I'm like, no, I haven't. Why have I not seen your AR maps? And then pop, it just works on every device. And I spent probably a day and a half before trying to get something that worked on Android, on iOS, and then boff, it just works. So I think for that, I'm excited to look into this, and I think this is too fresh, but definitely going to be playing around with it in the next few days.
Fantastic. And maybe you've got a more software side of perspective on this, Nicolas, or what's your hopes for the future?
That's a really good question. I mean, before we mostly used the Map Libre like package for all our map stories. Now we recently switched to a MapTiler SDK, and it already feels better. The developer experience is really good, and we're hoping that it just grows even better, even stronger. And like feature-wise, in my opinion, you guys have a really stable tool, a really stable services. I mentioned the map editor before. It's really convenient, also for maybe designers on our team or journalists who aren't that tech savvy or that map savvy. They can just use it, and it's really self-explanatory. And also, I mean, like the geosplats kind of thing, that sounds really interesting. So we're hoping to put that to good use, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and maybe I'll do a quick shameless plug for some of the cool stuff to try out, because we do have like the new base maps, right? So if anybody wants to play with them, we have a nice interactive dashboard to use during the networking break, where you can play with the new map styles. And for example, we were playing before the event started with the Apple Vision Pros. So there's some live demos you can check out. And then I just wanted to give a shout out online, right, to our cloud and developer team who are working super hard on some cool new things that will be coming out, probably Q1, maybe Q2, around data management, project management, all of that kind of stuff in the cloud. So it's really nice to hear people be excited for the future, because I think that then, I mean, we hear it on the customer-facing teams a lot, but I think it's really nice for the development teams to kind of see the impact that what they're building is making people happy, right? That's what we do it for.
Brilliant. And we have time for one question that's come from the online. So if you are watching this online, please do use the question option to ask questions. So we have one here. Which media companies are leading in the visual story space on an international level?
Do you think the question is from a publishing or from a software perspective?
I would say from a publishing perspective. Yeah. I mean, who should we be keeping an eye on?
These guys are doing some pretty great work.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We can't deny that. Is there other? Who else have you seen anything else?
I can give my top three and your top three.
Of course, yeah.
I love Reuters graphics. They're also building a lot of tools. I think they really have a unique style that's theirs, and then their graphics are beautiful. I would also plug in Continentalist, which is a small publisher from Singapore, Asia. And they do beautiful map and visual stories, and they're also building tools to help journalists create visuals. And I love The Pudding. Pudding does a lot of great interactives that I highly recommend.
Yeah, I think for me it would be, of course, the New York Times. But I mean, they have a really big team, so yeah, obviously they're able to do like pretty amazing stuff in that regard. And on an international scale, I would also mention the Financial Times. I think they have a really good team, really interesting stories. A lot of the inspirational stuff we share are from these two companies mostly. And from the German region, to come a bit more to Europe, I would mention the Zeit Online. We even had like the head of visuals there in our round. He gave us like a small critique of our stories, and they don't have like a big team, like maybe 5 to 6 people, something like that. And they focus most on like the bigger stories, more like the more impactful interactives, big interactives. But yeah, it's really amazing what they're doing. Very inspirational.
Fantastic. And your favorite, Luis?
It would be very hard for me to pick a favorite, especially in terms of the interactive graphics. But I do think it's really interesting how, especially some more traditional media branches are branching into this multimedia thing. So I think in terms of publishing, especially video graphics, I would actually go for some of the cool YouTubers that we follow. There's one really interesting one. It's called Real Life Lore, who does a little bit more kind of long form explanations of history and different things, and does a lot of video animations with maps as well. So I think just to take like a YouTube media perspective as well, that could be an interesting one.
Fantastic. Well, that's all we've got time for. So thank you very much again to Tom, Nicola, and Luis. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.